Hey all, you got a minute to talk about mind control? No, not the tinfoil hat kind. I'm talking about the sneaky ways governments, including our own dear Uncle Sam, might be using social media and entertainment to pull our strings. Sounds crazy, right? Stick with me. We're about to dive into the wild world of psychological operations, or psyops for short. Think of it like propaganda 2.0, less dropping leaflets from planes, more carefully curated tweets and TikTok dances. Now, before you dismiss this as conspiracy theory nonsense, remember that governments have a long and colorful history of messing with our minds. We're talking decades of propaganda, disinformation campaigns, and even straight-up psychological experiments on unsuspecting citizens. Don't worry, we'll unpack all of that juicy history in a bit. The point is, we live in a world where information is power, and whoever controls the information controls the people. And guess what? Social media has become the ultimate information battleground. It's where we get our news, connect with friends, and form opinions about the world. It's also where governments and powerful institutions can target us with laser-like precision, shaping our beliefs and behaviors without us even realizing it. Fun times, right? So buckle up, Buttercup, because we're about to embark on a wild ride through the twisted world of government manipulation in the digital age. We'll expose the tactics, unmask the players, and arm you with the knowledge you need to fight back. Because in the age of information warfare, knowledge is not just power. It's our only hope of remaining truly free. Alright, let's kick things off with a history lesson, shall we? Now, the idea of governments using sneaky tactics to influence their citizens is nothing new. We're talking centuries of propaganda, disinformation campaigns, and good old-fashioned manipulation. But things got really interesting in the 20th century, with the rise of mass media and the Cold War. Suddenly, governments had powerful new tools at their disposal for shaping public opinion. Enter the shadowy world of psychological operations, or psyops. These are covert operations designed to influence emotions, motives, and ultimately, the behavior of foreign governments, organizations, and even individuals. Think of it like propaganda on steroids. Now I know what you're thinking. John, that sounds awfully shady. Surely our government wouldn't engage in such unethical practices. Well, buckle up, because things are about to get weird. One particularly chilling example is Operation Northwoods, a top-secret plan cooked up by the U.S. Department of Defense in 1962. This plan, which thankfully was never implemented, involved staging fake terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, complete with civilian casualties. The goal? To drum up public support for a war with Cuba. I'm talking sinking boats full of refugees, hijacking planes, even simulating attacks on the U.S. military base at Guantanamo Bay. The whole thing was so insane that President Kennedy himself reportedly shut it down. But here's the kicker. Operation Northwoods wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the Cold War and beyond, the U.S. government engaged in a whole host of covert psyops, from spreading propaganda in foreign countries, to secretly funding artists and intellectuals, to promote American values. And while the Cold War may be over, the tactics haven't gone away. In fact, they've just become more sophisticated, more pervasive, and arguably even more insidious. Okay, so we've established that governments have a history of messing with our minds, but how does this all tie into social media? Well, my friends, let me introduce you to the silent puppet master of the digital age, the algorithm. You know, that mysterious code that decides what you see on your newsfeed, who pops up in your friend suggestions, and which ads relentlessly follow you around the internet. Now, on the surface, algorithms seem harmless enough. They're designed to personalize your online experience, showing you content that's relevant to your interests. But here's the catch. These algorithms are also incredibly good at exploiting our psychological vulnerabilities, feeding us a steady diet of information that confirms our existing biases and keeps us glued to our screens. Think about it. Every time you like a post, click on a link, or watch a video, you're feeding the algorithm valuable data about your preferences. And the more data it gathers, the better it becomes at predicting what will keep you engaged. The problem is, this often leads to a phenomenon known as the filter bubble, where we're only exposed to information that reinforces our existing views, while opposing viewpoints are conveniently filtered out. This creates a dangerous feedback loop, where our biases are amplified, our worldviews become more extreme, and our ability to engage in civil discourse with those who hold different opinions goes right out the window. And guess what? This kind of polarization and division is a breeding ground for manipulation, making it easier for bad actors, including governments, to sow discord, spread misinformation, and ultimately control the narrative. Section 4. Panic at the disco sensationalism, polarization, and you. Now let's talk about how this whole algorithm-driven echo chamber plays into our baser instincts. You see, we humans are hardwired for drama. We crave novelty, we get off on outrage, and we're suckers for a good scare. And guess what? The powers that be know this all too well. That's why social media is awash in sensationalized headlines, clickbait articles, and fear-mongering content designed to grab our attention and keep us hooked. It's a race to the bottom of the brain stem, where logic and reason go to die, and emotional reactivity reigns supreme. And in this environment of constant stimulation and heightened emotion, it's all too easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. We become more susceptible to manipulation, more likely to believe misinformation, and quicker to judge and demonize those who hold different views. And this, my friends, is where the real danger lies. Because when we're constantly bombarded with negativity, fear, and outrage, it creates a climate of anxiety, distrust, and division that's ripe for exploitation. Governments can use this to their advantage, subtly, or not so subtly, shaping public opinion on everything from foreign policy to domestic issues. They can discredit their opponents, justify controversial policies, and even erode trust in democratic institutions, all by playing on our fears and anxieties. It's a classic case of divide and conquer, and social media has become the ultimate weapon in this new age of information warfare. Section 5. Friends in high places, the government, and your favorite influencer. Now let's talk about a more subtle form of influence, the government's cozy relationship with social media influencers. You know, those seemingly relatable folks with millions of followers who hawk everything from makeup to meal kits. Well, it turns out that governments have caught on to the power of influencer marketing, and they're not afraid to use it to their advantage. We saw this firsthand during the COVID-19 pandemic, when governments around the world partnered with social media influencers to promote public health messages, encourage vaccination, and combat misinformation. Now, on the surface, there's nothing inherently wrong with using influencers to reach a wider audience, especially during a public health crisis. But it also raises some important questions about transparency, accountability, and the blurring lines between government messaging and authentic content. When influencers are paid to promote a particular message, are they truly representing their own views, or are they simply acting as mouthpieces for the government? And how does this impact the public's trust in both the influencers and the information they're promoting? These are complex questions with no easy answers. But one thing is clear. As governments become more sophisticated in their use of social media, we need to be increasingly critical of the information we consume online. Just because something is presented to us by someone we follow and trust doesn't automatically make it true or unbiased. It's more important than ever to do our own research, consider multiple perspectives, and be wary of anyone who benefits from promoting a particular narrative, whether it's a government agency or a social media influencer. Section 6. Media monopoly. Who controls the narrative? Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the bigger picture, the increasingly concentrated ownership of our media landscape. You see, it's not just about individual influencers or even specific social media platforms. It's about who controls the pipes, who owns the printing presses, who decides what information gets seen and heard. And unfortunately, that power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few massive corporations. We're talking about a handful of media conglomerates that control everything from the news we consume to the movies we watch to the music we listen to. And as these companies get bigger and more powerful, so too does their ability to shape public opinion and influence our understanding of the world. Now, some might argue that this is simply the nature of the beast in a capitalist society, but the problem is that this kind of media consolidation can have a chilling effect on free speech and a healthy democracy. When a small number of corporations control the flow of information, it becomes all too easy for them to silence dissenting voices, promote their own agendas, and maintain the status quo. This is especially concerning when you consider the close ties between these media giants and the government. We're talking about revolving doors between government agencies and media companies, cozy relationships between politicians and media moguls, and a whole lot of money flowing back and forth between the two. And in this environment of mutual back-scratching and shared interests, it's not hard to see how the lines between government propaganda and corporate media can become blurred. So, the next time you're scrolling through your newsfeed or flipping through the channels, take a moment to consider who's really in control of the information you're consuming, because in the age of media monopolies, understanding the forces that shape our perception is more important than ever.